Welcome back, everyone. We're moving on to the first panel of the day, Forestry, Deep Roots, Strong Communities. Before we begin, I wanted to remind our viewers that this panel has a live question and answer component in Whova following the opening comments. If you're on your computer, you'll look to the right of the video screen and can select the Q&A from the top right-hand side. If you're on your mobile device, select the Q&A on the left-hand side under the video screen. As questions are posted, please vote on the one you wish to have answered by the panelists. Please ensure that you are in the correct session prior to submitting your questions. And now we have a short message from the session sponsor, the Association of BC Forest Professionals.
We love trees here in British Columbia. We love how they look, how they give us shade, how they absorb carbon emissions, and give animals a home to live in. Even my house is made of wood. Pretty cool, right? But how can we take care of trees and use them well? It's simple. We trust the pros. Foresters from the Association of BC Forest Professionals don't just look after our forests and parks. They find ways to protect and restore ecosystems, protect wildlife habitat, and keep our communities safe from wildfires. They studied forestry at university or college, so they know what they're doing. They make sure the forest supports traditional Aboriginal uses, recreation, and tourism. Oh, and they also decide when, where, and how some trees can be cut, where other trees should be planted, and which should be left to grow freely. Now that's a perfect balance. The ABCFP is the largest professional forestry association in Canada. It ensures forest professionals are qualified, competent, and live up to a code of ethics. They love what they do and realize it's bigger than you and me. It's about us, our present, and our future. With the Association of BC Forest Professionals, our forests are in the best hands.
Thank you, Association for BC Forest Professionals, for your support of the 2021 Forum. It's now my pleasure to introduce this morning's session moderator, Susan Yurkovich, President and CEO, Council of BC Forest Industries.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I'm really pleased to be joining you today from the territories of the Coast Salish people for a discussion on BC's forest industry. And while I know we all wish we were on stage and catching up with each other in the hallways of the Prince George Convention Centre, the good news is we've still found a way to gather. So whether you are in Prince George or Campbell River, Surrey, if you're in Fort St. John or downtown Vancouver, thank you for joining us this morning. One of the great things about the Natural Resources Forum is that each January we gather in PG to focus on the sectors that really drive our economy and contribute to the well-being of communities across our province. It gives us time to share stories and address the issues that are significant and celebrate the contributions made in big ways and small, and remind us that while we might come from different communities or represent different industries, we are all interconnected, and the forest sector is no exception. British Columbians from rural communities and large urban centres, working in companies big and small, providing all kinds of goods and services, making parts, creating high-tech tools, looking at environmental management consulting, manufacturing goods, planting seedlings, and getting our products to market. We're all part of an industry that supports countless families across this province. And that brings us to the panel theme today, which is Deep Roots and Strong Communities, where we're going to talk a little bit about just that, how the forest industry connects us through its significant economic impact. You know, by economic impact, I am talking about the 100,000 jobs that the industry supports and $13 billion annually in GDP and close to $4 billion in taxes that are generated to support healthcare, education, and the important social services that we all count on. But I'm also talking about the diverse and resilient supply chain. You know, last year, Kofi commissioned an iTotem study to look at the economic and social benefits flowing from the forest industry's supply chain to communities throughout the province. And what we found is an industry whose breadth and reach is really like no other in the province. So today, our terrific panel is going to share a bit about their connection to the industry, what it means, whether it be to their employees, their councils, their company, or their community. Just before introducing our speakers, I want to share a short video that highlights what that iTotem study confirmed.
Hey British Columbians! What does a forester in Prince George, a drone maker in Vancouver, and an environmental consultant in Victoria all have in common? They're all part of a forestry community. That's because BC's forest industry purchased more than $7 billion in goods and services from nearly 9,900 suppliers, located in 340 communities, and from 120 Indigenous nations and affiliated organizations in 2019. Suppliers in communities like Vancouver, Prince George, Campbell River, Quesnel, and Surrey, which were the top 5 locations for forest industry spend. If each supplier employs 5, 10, 50, 100 people, that's a whole lot of British Columbians who count on the forest industry each day to support their families, pay their bills, and enjoy a great quality of life. To find out more about how your community is a forestry community, read our 2019 study, Deep Roots, Strong Communities, at kofi.org.
I'm really pleased to introduce our panel now, starting with my friend Mayor Lynn Hall. Mayor Hall is a true friend of our industry who probably really needs no introduction. He's served as the mayor of the Resource Forum's host city, Prince George, since 2014. A dedicated community contributor, Lynn has been a leader in the community in a variety of capacities for more than 30 years. And during that time, he's been both an advocate and a champion for our industry, and we welcome him here this morning. Next, Councillor Kelsie Robinson. Kelsie was elected to the Council of the Homalco First Nation on Vancouver Island in 2017, and since that time he's been heavily involved in his nation's tourism company, and he also sits on the board of the Homalco Forestry Company. He's currently enrolled at Royal Roads and studying business, and just the kind of next generation leader that our resource sector needs. And so we're really grateful that he's been able to fit in this panel in between his work and his school commitments. So welcome, Kelsie. Next, joining me beside me in our socially distant studio setup here is Lisa Dominato. Lisa is a councillor with the City of Vancouver, and she brings a perspective both as an elected official and having served as a senior public servant in a variety of roles in her 20-plus year career to date. She's passionate about community building and is an advocate for housing and mental health. And we're very pleased that now more of that housing will be built with wood, because in May, Vancouver Council voted to allow mass timber buildings up to 12 stories, and that's going to help to grow the carbon-friendly products that we make right here in British Columbia. And finally, Mike Wilcox, who's the founder of FYBR Solutions, which is a Vancouver-based drone supplier to the forest industry. And I think FYBR is a really great story. It's a BC success story. When I was talking to Mike, he talked about the fact that this was a partnership that was born out of a friendship between him, a student at business at Western Ontario, and an engineering student at UBC. And it's a great example of how traditional industries are employing new technology to transform all parts of our operations, while also serving to seed new businesses that are going to support the future of our industry. So welcome to all. We are in disparate locations, but we are looking forward to the conversation that follows. Each of our panelists are going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll look forward to the discussion and to your questions following that. And to kick it off, I'm going to turn it over to you in Prince George. Go ahead, Mayor Hall.
Susan, thanks very much. And it's interesting how a year ago we were wandering around the Convention Conference Center in Prince George with 1,100 delegates and a great trade fair that was taking place. But the importance of this forum is really, at the end of the day, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, is so important for us to have. So I want to thank C3 Alliance. I certainly want to thank you, Susan, and the work you're doing with Kofi. It's important for me just to talk a little bit about the impact that the forest sector has had on me personally. I go back a number of years, and I worked as a young boy in my maybe my late teens, working in a small mill on the green chain. And I think that if you want to experience what the forest industry is like, that's a great place to start. It's important, I think, for us to take a look at the significance of the forest sector, not only in our hometown of Prince George or Kamloops, throughout Quesnel and Williams Lake and north. So for me, it really starts at home. We have a sector here that has been around for as long as Prince George has been around. We're going to be 106 years old here in a couple of months, and I can tell you that it's because of the forest sector that this city is where it is today. The sector has progressed in many, many different ways, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the connection the forest sector has on Prince George and our region, and I think even more importantly, what it means to us from a provincial perspective. When we take a look at the sector locally, and your clip about deep roots, strong communities, Susan, it really hits the mark. It hits the mark about what it means to have the forest sector be so predominant in your city from an employment perspective, tax perspective, and what it does for those secondary industries that provide services to the sector. But let's take it more now into the region, and let's talk about northern BC and central BC and the impact it has. There isn't a community in the greater half of the province that isn't impacted directly by this sector. Here in Prince George, the sector is one of our main pillars when we look at our economic strategy for Prince George. And then take it provincially, and we can go down into the Kootenays and on the island and through the central and interior part of the province. It has an impact. If you're in downtown Vancouver, the forest sector has an impact on what you do. You may not see it, it may not be visual, but it's there. And I think what we're able to do today with this panel is talk a little bit about its provincial impact and streaming from communities like Prince George and Quesnel. I've been, as you pointed out in my introduction, I feel as if I've been around a very, very long time, and maybe I have, but for me, the forest sector really provides three main components. And you talked about the diversity and the resilience, but for me, it's about the sustainability of the sector. That's so important. And I've seen over the years, a multitude of decades actually, how this sector has progressed. And the BC Foresters clip first starting about the knowledge and the impact and to be cognizant of the forest sector in our environment. We've seen all these come to fruition. And I just really think that the message has to be the importance of the sustainability of this sector, what it's doing from an environmental perspective, and what it means to our entire province. And that's always been my messaging, and it's so important. So I'm hoping that what you take away from this panel today is diverse opinions, diverse backgrounds, and an opportunity to ask us questions about where we see the industry going and the role that it will continue to play in the economic development of this province. Coming out of COVID, I've said many times that it's going to be municipalities in the natural resource sector that really drives us to restart the economy coming out of the pandemic. And I firmly believe in that. So thank you very much once again for inviting me today to say a few words and participate in the forum, and look forward to it. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thanks very much, Mayor Hall. Three words, diversity, resilience, and sustainability, and I'm sure we will come back to those three words as we continue with our discussion. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Councillor Kelsie Robinson. Kelsie, go ahead, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsie Robinson. I'm a member of the Coast Salish and Nuu-chah-nulth Nation. My mother is Homalco, where I sit on council. Homalco is in Kamloops, where I grew up. It is the salmon capital of the world. It's also known for being a predominant logging community, as many other northern towns are on Vancouver Island. I can tell you a bit about my nation's history. My members had lived in the territory around the mouth of Butte Inlet from roughly late 1800s through to about 1980. Community members were predominantly fishermen and loggers until about 1975 when the Davis Plan came out from DFO. which is an attempt to gain more control on commercial salmon industries. The Homalco First Nation ended up going from 25 commercial fishing licenses down to 5. Where's our economic growth now? So logging became a huge economic dependence for my people back then. Because there is no real fishing happening in our latest settlement in Church House, we were relocated to Campbell River about 10 years later. Homalco First Nation base has grown to approximately 280 members on reserve and 200 off. Homalco First Nation needed economic drivers to push us towards being self-reliant. So forestry is important to Homalco First Nation. We wish to be stewards of the land, look over and protect our resources in our territory. We want to know what trees are out there, age-based, to properly manage responsible logging so that our forests, fish, and wildlife all benefit in the long run for our future generations. We recently passed the Homalco First Nations Land Code, busy trying to get that going right now. Homalco First Nation logging came into existence about a decade ago. We're a large First Nation-owned logging company of about 30 employees, and supports up to 25 post-secondary students like myself who go to school each year, which is huge. My personal connection to logging. So, I knew nothing about forestry 4 years ago. I got onto the board of directors for our forestry company in 2017, started learning the jargon, the business, and we have some amazing board members that fight tooth and nail for us with the government officials and some of our business partners. Just kidding, most of our business partners are pretty good. 2020, in the summer, I had an amazing opportunity to work for Inter4 as a summer student out of Campbell River. Learned the entire operation, from layout engineering, silviculture, scaling whales, logs, witnessing a yarding show, learning what a skidder and heli show is. I got the chance to do some office work and got to learn the business side of things as well. I've grown a personal connection, sorry, coffee hasn't quite kicked in. I've grown a real personal connection with logging. Once you learn something and experience it, you know it. I didn't know it before this opportunity, and I'm super grateful to have been a summer student with Inter4 this past summer. Business opportunities. So Inter4 has been a partner with the Homalco First Nation for 10 years now. Inter4 is compelled to use Homalco First Nation as a logging operation. And we have a 5-year plan in place to plan projects together, cutting permits, share the logging, and share the profits, and essentially build better economies of scale. Homalco First Nation's other economic driver is tourism. Homalco Tourism has grown from 2008 onwards to become a world-renowned tour operation. And we share our logging and tourism successes on our tours. So it's important for Homalco to let our guests know that our tourism company and logging company go hand in hand. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks very much, Kelsie. I mean, it's very impressive. You go into school, you're a counselor, you've had this great internship opportunity, and I'm definitely going to come back to you. I think it's so interesting that, you know, you've got 30 employees and then you're also supporting 25 post-secondary students to go to school. And so I want to come back and talk a little bit more and explore that opportunity and maybe how we can support some other opportunities for other students to participate. Next I want to turn to Lisa, who's joining me in studio, and turn it over to you, Councillor Dominato.
Great, thanks, Susan. I'd like to first start by acknowledging we're on the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh lands, and really honored to be here and thrilled that you invited me. One of the things I take a lot of pride in as a Vancouver City Councillor is really sharing the knowledge and acknowledging that our natural resource sector has a critical role in our urban living. And I think that's something that we need to be talking a lot more about and more loudly, particularly as urban councillors. And I had the opportunity last year, I participated in the Ames Roundup Conference. And as part of that conference, I talked about how here we're talking in Vancouver about electrification and moving more in that direction. Well, we can't do that without copper and ore, and we rely on the mining sector. And I see a similar conversation unfolding today as we talk about the importance of the forestry sector to urban living. So for me, you really touched at the very beginning on the theme of interconnectedness. And tied into that, I see sort of three themes I hope we'll touch on throughout our discussion today. One is around the local economy. Mayor Hall talked about how forestry is regional. Well, I'd like to bring it back to as Vancouverites, as metro area, recognizing the critical importance forestry plays in our urban local economy. You highlighted that in terms of spend, the top spend in the forestry sector is actually in Vancouver, $978 million, and that was found through your report, over 500 suppliers. And when you look at that supply chain, that ranges from engineering services, legal services, catering, the Port of Vancouver, consultants, communications, manufacturing. And much of that is happening down here in Vancouver and Metro Vancouver. And I'm not sure that we realize that at times when we're going about our days, just as Lynn Hall was saying, is that it's maybe not visible to us, the forestry sector, and yet we're supplying that sector. That translates into $2 billion spent in the entire Metro Vancouver area. And so I think when you translate into jobs, it's roughly 40% of jobs, forestry sector jobs, are actually down in the Lower Mainland. And I think that's a really interesting fact and something that I think about and I'll be talking more about with residents. But the other themes that have emerged to me as part of the discussion of this panel is two other themes. One is around city building. In Vancouver, top of mind for Vancouverites and residents in the Lower Mainland is housing and housing affordability. There's an enormous opportunity to leverage mass timber. You highlighted at the beginning, just last year, we adjusted, we have our own building code, but to align with the national building code, we've adjusted that to double the number of stories, so going from 6 stories to 12 stories for mass timber. And this presents an enormous opportunity in terms of delivering housing more quickly, reduce costs for the developers and builders, as well as ultimately for the consumer. And also there's other benefits in terms of durability, in terms of fire safety, and energy efficiency. And so that's, to me, another connection back to the forest sector, is how we use that in developing our city and building out housing. And then the other area that was already talked about as well was around the issue of sustainability. Again, this has been top of mind and discussed in the Lower Mainland, is around how do we address and respond to climate change. And one of the areas as a city we've identified that we can have the most impact is in terms of our buildings. And how do we lower carbon emissions on our buildings? So we've set a target in Vancouver of reducing those emissions by 40% by 2030 from our current levels. And we see that being achieved through the building materials and practices that we use. And so one of the things that we endorsed just last fall was around creating some incentives to support the building sector, the development sector, in moving towards low carbon materials and practices in our city. And again, see mass timber being part of that. And then the other aspect of this is that the forests are a renewable resource. And so we need to be considering that again as part of an opportunity for our city and for all Metro Vancouver areas. But I think that hopefully we'll touch on those themes more, but I'm really thrilled to be here this morning, so thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Lisa. I look forward to carrying on with that thread of that conversation. Last introductory comments to Mike Wilcox. I just think this is you know, we talk a lot about our sector, you know, we are a manufacturing sector, but this is also a high-tech sector. You know, when you look through our sector, whether it be in the mill environment and increasingly on the land base, there's a ton of technology that is employed, and a lot of companies are buying the technology that is being created by the smart minds like Mike. So I think this is a really great story of how the sector is seeding new businesses, and I'm going to let Mike talk a little bit about that. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. I'm grateful for the opportunity to exchange ideas with such a wonderful group of panelists. I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the territory of the Klele First Nation here in Prince George. I'd like to use my time this morning to share our story and some insights into the forest industry and communities that we've had the good fortune of working with over the last 6 years. My co-founder and I are both from Kamloops, and over the last few decades growing up in Kamloops, we always saw the ever-present pulp mill in town, and that's really what planted the seeds of forestry in our minds early on. We recognized that the rapid progression of drone technology and its potential as a remote sensing tool. And so we bought our first drone, we set up our office in the entrepreneurship building at UBC, and we started cold calling. And we started cold calling mines, bulk terminals, oil and gas companies, forestry companies. And initial interest in drone technology really opened the door to a lot of boardrooms. But we needed to dig deeper into one industry to solve real problems. For me, the forest industry was the right fit. It was in our backyard. There were real problems that we can identify, and the impact of solving them was significant. We collaborated with the Integrated Remote Sensing Lab at UBC to start to answer some questions such as, can we use drones to assess forest inventory throughout the harvest cycle? Can we identify early infestation or burn severity? Can we accurately measure wood inventory at pulp mills, sawmills, and pellet plants? And as we traveled from town to town throughout the province and abroad, listening to challenges of people on the ground, as well as in offices, we noticed that access to this type of information was bringing people to the table and enabling conversations and knowledge sharing. One thing that we did not anticipate was the incredible impact on human connection through that transparent communication. Digitizing the forest or mill and bringing it to a virtual boardroom has been incredibly powerful, especially during this pandemic when we can't all physically be in the same room. We saw older, experienced foresters using this information to share wisdom with younger, tech-savvy foresters who were keen to take on the role of drone pilots. We saw industry working with government to adopt a new technology and new process to improve fiber utilization and reporting. We saw foresters using information to improve the consultation process with First Nations and tracking progress throughout the harvest and regeneration cycle. Today, we're still in the infancy of the Forestry 4.0 revolution and a path to a more connected forest, and it needs your support. I'm excited for the future of the industry when I see innovative wood products like wood pellets, like CLT, like mass timber. I'm also excited for the jobs of the future. We will always need some boots on the ground, but more and more the industry is attracting engineers, software developers, and IT professionals who are helping to build the equipment, the software, the systems of tomorrow. And that's both inside the mill and outside the mill. But innovation is an ongoing process. I've seen firsthand the investment in innovation in markets like Scandinavia and the US Southeast. And it will take a sustained effort from big industry players, from small and medium-sized businesses, from government, and from First Nations to ensure that the BC forest industry remains competitive. And that is why we chose the forest sector. The chance to work with humble and hardworking people in big cities and small towns working together to create the industry of the future. I see forestry as a technology industry, powered by talented leaders who care about forests and the people who live and work throughout the supply chain. And I'm pleased that our technology is helping to solve some of their challenges. As of today, we're actively managing inventory at over 50 mills across North America on a weekly and on a monthly basis. And we're processing thousands of hectares of forest data each and every month. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Mike. Great intro, and there's so much here from the four of you. I'm sure we could talk all day. But we don't have time to talk all day. So we'll probably what I'm going to try and do is go through different themes. And I've got a few questions to start off with. I would encourage all of you. Kelsie mentioned getting the coffee kicking in. I've got my big cup here in the studio, and I would encourage you all to make sure that you use the Whova app and put the questions that you have to this group up. But I want to, and we will get to some of those, but we'll just start with a few that I've been thinking about while you guys have been talking. And the first one I want to start with is what Lisa talked about in the interconnectedness. And you've each told a story here about the forest sector, and you've touched on what it means sort of from your perspective, but this concept of interconnectedness, and I do want to talk about what you said, Lisa, is, people don't realize sitting here in Vancouver how connected they are to the forest sector. It's easy if you're coming from Campbell River or Prince George because you see it, you live it, your neighbors are there. But to your point, 40% of the jobs that are forestry jobs are actually domiciled in the southwest part of the province, and it's $2 billion to the metro area. So what do you think we should, as a collective, be doing to help get people to understand that connectivity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really passionate about this, and my husband's family actually is from Quesnel, so they grew up living and breathing this and recognize that connection. But for many of us, I grew up in the Lower Mainland. It wasn't visible to me at all, whether it be where my food comes from, whether it's where how I, my cell phone, the copper that's in my cell phone these. And so I think we really need to do a big push on education and raising awareness around this. And it starts young, right, in our school system, talking about the different opportunities, career opportunities, but showing that full cycle of how things come to be. So for example, I have this conversation at home with my kids about, we go to the grocery store and we buy food for our meals, whether it be chicken, vegetables, and we talk about, okay, well, where do those come from? Because they're like, we just go to the store. I'm like, well, no, it doesn't just materialize in the store. There's farms. There's a whole production chain for how you get food on your table. And so similarly, there's a production chain and supply chain around us putting a new apartment building downtown or building homes in our communities. And so I think we need to start to have those conversations in our school sector, but public awareness campaigns and making people aware of that entire chain of how we get those materials to build our homes with. So I think there's a big education push here that's necessary.
Lynn, I'm going to ask you the same question. This is something that you've spent a lot of time doing and thinking about, but maybe you can share some of the things that you think we should be doing more of.
Lisa's comments, Susan, really excite me about how she's so passionate about the fact that Vancouver is a major player in the forest sector, and I think she's really hit the nail on the head when we talk about how do we get that message out. We get the messaging out through organizations like yours, Susan, but I think I have a responsibility, and I think the sector has a responsibility here in Prince George and throughout the region to understand the impact of the forest sector in Vancouver, and Lisa has really, I think, highlighted that for me this morning, and now is the opportunity for us to really as a group engage in getting the messaging out throughout our region, throughout the central part of the province, Vancouver Island, about the impact that the sector has in each and every one of our communities. And I know I'm going to take this away today and talk a lot about the impact of the sector that's occurring in Vancouver. And you talk about, sort of the production process. You talk about how that meal gets to your table, and you talk about how your cell phones work, and I think it's about now the impact the forest sector has on a city like Vancouver, and we all share a responsibility in getting that messaging out. So I'm pretty excited about the conversation that we can have after the forum.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to actually go to one of the Whova questions there. I'm going to turn to you, Mike. So you in your presentation talked about the tech, the future of the sector, the fact that we are employing more engineers and technologists. I mean, you won't have all the information about the products and markets, but I think from what you're seeing in terms of the managing of the fiber piece, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you see as the future in terms of particularly on the product side and particularly what you're seeing around fiber utilization.
Yeah, absolutely. I first just want to echo the sentiment around providing, getting the visibility and the message out there to the rest of the province and those people who aren't directly working within the supply chain and seeing the trucks roll down the roads every day. In terms of the technology aspect, I think there's a lot of different components to technology innovation that is being leveraged in the industry today and still can be leveraged. From a remote sensing standpoint, LiDAR is becoming a very powerful and effective tool to assess a landscape level forest inventory. Satellite technology is continuously changing and progressing. I mean, everybody's kind of watching the SpaceX rockets go up, and what that means for the future of Earth observation, and as well as the connected forest piece. Starlink being up there, it won't be long before we'll be able to have connected people and equipment wherever they are in remote operations. And I look a lot to other industries as well, like for example, agriculture. So there's a major initiative and movement going on in agriculture right now, sometimes referred to as precision agriculture, where we're leveraging remote sensing technologies and data and machine learning to start to better understand crop health and improve yields. And I think that's a really good microcosm or maybe a glass ball into the future where, agriculture is typically a more controlled environment, whereas our forests are remote and rugged. But it's an example of where things are going, and beyond remote sensing, what's going on inside the mills in terms of improving production efficiency and lumber recovery factors. And, really it's about kind of bringing it all together and not just focusing on one piece, but continuously investing in those innovative technologies.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to go to you next, Kelsie. We're talking, the question is about the future of the forest industry, and I know that your nation has a company, I think you mentioned it employs currently about 30 people. And maybe you can talk a little bit as a successful partnership with Interfor, but can you talk a little bit, what are you seeing from your community's perspective as opportunities for growth and for some of those 25 students that you're supporting to go to post-secondary education?
Okay. Thanks for the question, Susan. So for our logging company right now, it was in beginning stages, we could say 5 years ago or so now, but now we're really starting to divide it out into the entities it is right now. We have a pure logging side of it, and then we're just starting a tenure company right now, and we have really good board members in place and good leadership in again, and we're trying to get the momentum going. And it's important for us to make sure that we are getting the maximum utilization out of the tenure we're allocated and what we can physically log and how to keep the business going with the 30 some odd employees that we have working for us for presumably 10 months of the year. And as for those post-secondary students going to institutions and stuff, we have an initiative to get their schooling covered and to get their living allowance covered as well. And we get some funding dollars from this year to year, but it's not enough to cover the entire scope of our students. So we have to come up with that money on our own. And forestry is a good alternative for us to get extra funding dollars for our students to go to post-secondary.
And the study, you know, we know that forestry jobs are good jobs. So if we can transition some of those folks into that sector, they can be putting money back into the community as well. And I want to talk a little bit about, you know, Mike, you talked about attracting engineers and technologists. I liked your words, you know, partnering with the humble and hardworking, because I think, you know, I've spent a long time in the forest sector, and I would say, you know, I left for a while, I went to the energy sector and came back, and what drew me back is the people, because generally you find the people in this sector they're humble and they're hardworking and they are really resilient, because of course we've had to be with a cyclical industry. So I think this is either for any of the panelists, you know, as we're talking about the sector, the interconnectedness, the opportunities, how do we draw more young people to this sector, whether it be, you know, working for you know, fiber, or helping you, Lisa, plan buildings that are going to be built out of wood. You know, Lynn, you have institutions in your community, CNC, UMBC, and of course, Kelsie, you've got young people who are looking for opportunities. So I'll put that out to the group, and maybe you can just feel free to jump in.
I'll maybe take a stab at it.
Okay, we'll go Lisa first, and then to Mayor Hall. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that really stood out to me, I went off to university and I went to UBC, and they have a fantastic forestry program there. When I arrived at university, I had no idea you could have a career in forestry. Again, grew up in the Lower Mainland, wasn't part of my upbringing, and one of my closest friends was in the program there, and I had no concept that that was an opportunity. And I was thinking about what Michael was saying around the evolution of the forest industry and the technology component to it. Not to harken back to education again, but I don't even know that our young people are going to be aware of these opportunities, and so I think that that's has to be a focus of our education system, is to expose young people to the variety of roles out there, and how certain engineering roles or consultant roles or technology roles may intersect with this sector. And I certainly, maybe just the nature of where I was going to school, I mean, I just heard about traditional jobs. You can become a lawyer, a doctor, a nurse. I didn't have any exposure to natural resource jobs, and it's evolving and it's changing rapidly. And so I appreciated Michael's comments around that and the technology component. And so I do think we have to focus more at a younger age, but also within our college and post-secondary institutions.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll go to you, Mayor Hall.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. And here in Prince George, we've had the opportunity with our post-secondary institutions to be really in the heart of the sector. So, of course, many of their programs are designed to give those options to students. But we've also have visual examples. The Wood Innovation Design Center that's in downtown Prince George, built a number of years ago, one of the first 6-story all-wood buildings that was constructed. And I think these examples, along with Brock Commons at UBC, these are examples that we have to get out and talk about, and we have to provide those options, just not in the post-secondary area, but that K-12, and let students know that they do have an option when it comes to the forestry sector. And it's not just about working on the land base, it's about those high-tech jobs, Susan, that you mentioned in your introduction. And you see the really the technology grow within the sector, and you see the technology grow in our mills, and the opportunity for people to get involved from that perspective. So I think it's really important that we have the educational groups, the colleges and universities and K-12 sector understand that there is opportunity, and we want them to provide those opportunities to their students.
Thanks, Lynn. and I would just, I mean, Kelsie, you talked about having this experience over the summer to go and work in one of, our member companies, one of the great companies who is headquartered here in British Columbia, learning all parts of the business, and obviously that had an impact on you. What else, obviously more of that would be great, but what else do you think we could do as a collective to help draw young people to the sector?
I'm glad you asked that question. I was going to piggyback off of Lisa's comments there. I'm 26 and I first started my post-secondary education journey in 2013, and I really wish I had learned more about the forestry sector. Like Lisa had mentioned, I'd really only heard, you could go into healthcare, you could go into business, you go into psychology, just like all these sort of what I call just sort of basic courses kind of thing. But if I was younger back then, I felt I would have really been compelled to go into forestry and take something like log scaling, or try to get an entry-level job with big corporations in town like Interfor or around the island, Timber West, so on and so forth. And I really think students my age need to see those videos that we had the chance to see at the beginning of this forum. Now, we're talking about the forestry sector and how it's a sustainable resource, wood, and how homes and buildings are made out of it, and how we're building higher and higher.
Kelsie, invitation is still open. You're only 26. We would welcome you at any time, full time. But once you're finished your studies, I would be completely remiss, and I'm sorry, this is going to be an absolutely shameless plug, but mostly COVID has been not fun for all kinds of reasons. But sometimes, these kind of dramatic shifts make you change. And we have for years had at Kofi a forest education program that was largely delivered in Prince George and in and around the surrounding regions. With COVID, we've actually had to take our program virtual. And so the great thing about that is we now can offer it all around the province, and indeed we've actually hosted classes even from outside the province. And so it's really important. I couldn't agree more. We want to share the opportunities and the great things about this sector. And we've got a super enthusiastic teacher who delivers forest education in classrooms now around the province. And so if anyone is interested in that, please share that with teachers everywhere, and please feel free to book a time with us. I want to switch now, and I want to, we've got a mayor, mayor and councillor from communities that have lots of businesses, and then we've got a business, Homalco, Nation's forest industry, and also Mike, who's serving the forest industry. And the question up here says, what can we do to better support our small, medium, and Indigenous companies scale up? And that's something that we struggle with. It's actually a Canadian thing. We have these fantastic minds that put together these ideas and are developing technology, but we actually have trouble kind of scaling up. So I'm interested in that question. What do you think we could do to help small businesses, medium businesses, Indigenous enterprises that have, that are in there and that are doing well? But what can we do to help succeed? I'm going to go to you first, Mayor Hall.
Susan, good question, and we're seeing here with certainly Dai Poutney and the Clytely Tene and the work that they're doing with various companies. Canfor, for example, we have Lakeland Mills here, we have Dunkley and Carrier. It's important, I think, that we, in some form or fashion, coordinate with those companies the opportunities for that, what I call sort of secondary industry, and they're the industry that is really assisting and providing resources to the main forest companies. It's a tremendous amount of work, and you said it, that we've been struggling with that for a number of years. And I think it's the connectivity between the major forest companies and those smaller businesses that are trying to grapple with getting into the business, trying to provide services to the business. And we continue to do that here in Prince George through our Economic Development Office. And I think that's one of the keys, is we continue to use our ECDev offices throughout the province to try to promote that. But we also need Council of Forest Industries, and I know you're there. You're there on a nonstop basis, but organizations really need that assistance and that push by a group like Kofi, who is so knowledgeable about the industry, Susan. So it's a multitude of things that need to come together, and that is the struggle. It's the struggle of putting that together, and that's why we use our Economic Development Office the way we do to try to succeed and pull those folks together to give them opportunities within the sector.
Thanks. Mike, you're a small medium business now that's growing. What would you say would be the most helpful to you to actually help your company scale?
Yeah, I mean, speaking from experience, you know, in how we've managed to gain traction in the industry, a big part of it is finding the champions within various organizations, and having them, you know, first of all, listen and exchange ideas, and then, you know, try with the understanding that not everything is going to work on the first go, but, you know, as we've seen drone technology, for example, progress over the years, I remember some early failures, you know, 5-6 years ago, that really put a bitter taste of drone technology in the forest industry's mouths, and I think part of that is just that persistence of continuously improving the technology and that staying power. And, you know, small medium businesses, you know, cash is king. You know, we need to support those small medium-sized businesses so that they stick around long enough to keep up with the pace and the cycle of the forest industry, and things don't change overnight. And when we start to talk about a scale of, you know, harvest seasons, you know, we need to be around next harvest season to hopefully get that next that next kick at the can. So really, it boils down to people and connecting with the right people within organizations, connecting with the right people within the academic institutions to collaborate on what the best path forward to ultimately, you know, create value. I mean, with any innovation, it's not innovation for the sake of innovation. It's solving fundamental business problems. How can we, you know, be more efficient? How can we make more money? How can we reduce costs? So innovation still has to target those key fundamental business propositions, and you know, we need to connect with the right people in order to do that.
Thanks. Kelsie, you want to jump in a little bit? What would be helpful to advance Homalco Nation's forestry operations, or tourism,
Sure.
or any other the small or medium-sized businesses?
Sounds good. As the prosperity panel went yesterday, the last panel of the day, it was a talk on prosperity, and a few of the chiefs in the discussion had mentioned UNDRIP and free and prior informed consultation and stuff. And we really just want to be sitting there at the table from the beginning when big companies start, you know, planning projects in your area. And you go back 10 years ago, and how often was that happening? Not so often. You look at how often it's happening today, and we really have to be sitting at the table and involved in discussions. And what can companies in the surrounding areas do is Interfor's doing in the Homalco area. We're working together, we're building economies of scale, and we're throwing our licenses together to get, you know, bigger cut areas. We're not barging all our equipment to, you know, 2 hours out of Campbell River to go log a small 12,000 meter cubed area. We're doing it to tackle 30,000 plus cubic metered areas now, and stuff like that's really helping nations like Homalco out.
Thanks, Kelsie. There's a question here. I think it's fantastic. It says, how can rural communities such as Prince George, Williams Lake partner with urban centers like Vancouver to heighten the awareness of the forest sector? So connectivity, I mean, you ghosts have talked about it, but I'm just thinking that's the seed of an idea to maybe find partners between urban and rural. But I don't know if you want to comment on that, either Lisa or Lynn.
Yeah, well, I think there is an opportunity for partnership there, and I was reflecting as you were asking that question about some of the work I did provincially, where we had twinning of cities, where we had overseas when I was doing work in education, and similarly, you could have something like that, and an opportunity to partner and do some education, and so I think it's a fantastic idea. I appreciate the question, and that's why I was really thrilled to come on and participate in this conversation. Is how can individuals like myself be champions and around these topics? And one of the things I was talking with Susan before we talked about is that after this forum, I'm hoping to do an opinion piece that can be published locally to talk about this conference, to talk about the discussion that we have here as a panel. But I would love to explore how we could have a more formalized partnership with rural communities and Metro Vancouver municipalities.
Anything you want to add on that, Lynn?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Lisa. And, when the panel is over, my next calls this afternoon are going to be to the panelists and to you, Susan, because that question is really part of what we've been talking about for a bit now. How do we create something that we can deliver in an urban setting about the importance of what happens in the regions and what happens in the urban areas? So Lisa's opinion piece I'm looking forward to, and I think it will really create the impetus for us to be able to move in that direction. And who knows, maybe we can put another panel together, Lisa, with all of us and talk about the importance of that urban rural connection when it comes to this, the entire resource sector, not just forestry.
I think that's a great idea, and a good idea for sure for a future discussion. You know, it's been an extraordinary year, and it's been a disruptive year for so many, for communities, for families, and for businesses. And there's a question up here, I don't think we can have this panel without kind of touching on the year that was a little bit. And with respect to the supply chain, what has been learned about resiliency and viability of regional supply chains, given all the volatility. I think that's kind of I would be interested in your comments on that. I don't want to, maybe I'll head to you first, Lynn, because you're part of a regional hub there, but anybody want to provide comments on that?
Thanks, Susan. I think for me, it's been we had 2019, we move into 2020 in the position that we're in across the board. It's not just the resource sector, it's what we're having to do to meet the challenges in every municipality in the province. And I think as well, when we take a look at the various communities, and Fort Nelson, you talk about what's happening in Dawson Creek. It's about innovation, it's about how you get through, and it's how you innovate in whatever business you're trying to survive in, given the pandemic. We see markets ebb and flow over the last number of months. We see prices increase on the lumber side, and it's innovation and how you find new markets for the sector, and how you develop those markets, and how strong the economies are in certain areas in the States and certain areas in Canada and overseas. And I know the industry is working flat out trying to be innovative in looking at other markets, but still, there's still a huge challenge for us, and it's going to be a slow move. And I look to the professionals that are in the industry to guide us through this, Susan. But it is a tremendous impact, and we'll just have to wait and see. But I think innovation and the ability to, and I don't like to use this, but knee-jerk react to things that happen on an hourly basis. How do we be prepared for those changes that happen and hit us so quickly?
What's the long game, and how do we skate to where the puck is going? So I think that's something we'll all have in mind. Well, I think I'm looking at the tablet here, and I think we could carry on this discussion for quite some time, but we've only got a few minutes left here. And so I'm going to ask each of you if there's any last things you want to just mention on our panel. I'm going to start in reverse order with you, Mike, and we've got about 1 minute for you to leave your thoughts or capture anything that we've missed in the discussion today.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Building off of the topic there, just around the last year, looking at 2020, I think I'm really impressed with not only the resilience, but also how agile and how quickly the supply chain has adapted. And sometimes by force, sometimes being pulled tooth and nail, but sometimes that's what's needed to spur change. And I'm impressed and emboldened by the agility of the industry, how we've adapted. I mean, we're doing this conference virtually right now. I think that kind of ties into the question around how to connect some of the urban and rural centers. Without the pandemic, we may not have been as open to connecting virtually as we are now, and I think that's going to be one of the legacies to come out of this, and probably one of the benefits, if there are any. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, and I'm encouraged by what we've seen so far.
Thanks, Mike. Lisa, I'm going to go to you for 1 minute wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Really thrilled by the conversation today. And one of the things I want to highlight is we talked earlier about the use of mass timber, and the conversations I've been having with the development community and building community in Vancouver. They're extremely excited about this, including hybrids of mass timber. And as an example, Westbank is looking at a 21-story affordable rental project in Vancouver in partnership with the province BC Housing. And the intent of this is using local suppliers, so they're working with a company in Castlegar, but focusing on developing a prototype so we can address all of the challenges and opportunities up front with working with mass timber, for instance, including things like insurance underwriting, and to use this as sort of a showcase piece to inform the industry. And builders are excited to work more with wood and mass timber in our city and developing housing. And I'm just really thrilled that we're having this dialogue, and look forward to the sort of conversations that flow from this afterwards, and what are the opportunities to further this dialogue at a regional level, but also a Metro Vancouver level, and raising awareness about the critical importance of natural resources to urban living, and particularly the forest sector. So really appreciate you inviting me to come on today.
Thanks, Lisa. Kelsie, I'll give you 1 minute to wrap up.
Yeah. I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me to sit on the panel today. It was a great opportunity for me. I learned a lot and definitely expanded my education on the forestry sector. So my closing remarks will be to the big companies in the room to influence post-secondary institutions to get younger people like me fired up again in the industry, because I had known, like I said before, known about all the opportunities and how vital the forestry sector is to British Columbia. I would have been very inspired to take a career path in forestry and not so much in tourism, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks so much, Kelsie. We really appreciate you joining us. Mayor Hall, 1 minute wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I'll keep my remarks short. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. What I take away from this today is really the opportunity for us to continue the messaging about the forest sector and the natural resource sector overall. And it's an opportunity, I think, for us to take the messaging out on the road, not literally, but figuratively through virtual opportunities, to be able to talk about the resource sector. And as Lisa has pointed out, what does it mean to Vancouver, and what does it mean to those of us in Prince George and Quesnel. So I really appreciate it and have learned a tremendous amount today, and I'm excited about what we can do from here, Susan. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Mayor Hall. I just want to wrap up. with a few words: diversity, resilience, sustainable, humble and hardworking, high-tech, agile, interconnected. And then just to close with what Kelsie just said, you know, opportunity and getting people fired up. There are lots of opportunities. You know, often when we have these forestry panels, we talk about the challenges, and I don't want to, you know, sugarcoat it. There's lots of challenges in our sector, but I think there's also tremendous opportunities to work in partnership with Indigenous communities, with our local communities, urban, rural, with our new businesses, with our existing businesses, with our friends in labor. There's opportunities for us in the forest sector to move, to build the future. And I think these are words that are going to stand us in very good stead. So thank you all for getting up and joining us today, for the questions, and we look forward to the balance of the conference. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan and panelists, for participating in this morning's session. That was a great discussion on the importance of forestry to all communities in BC. That concludes this session. We remind you to click back on the agenda and select the next session to view the live stream, a keynote from Chief Charlene Gale with a live Q&A.